Let's dive into it today. A lot is going on. Not only are we seeing a market pullback, we're also seeing some strategic moves around the planet, including Venezuela, the idea of Greenland, and of course, maybe how crypto could be involved in all these things. We're going to break that down and so much more. You guys don't want to miss it. I've got a special guest joining me again today, of course, is our old standard. I shouldn't say old standard, our new standard of having great creators on the show. And that's a constant, of course, with Mikkel. You guys have seen him on the show before. He'll be coming in a second. Before we get into that, obviously, I want you guys to do one thing, and that is make sure, like, and subscribe. We were able to get into the number 2 ranked spot, this podcast, the number 2 ranked spot behind our own network podcast, as the top 15 crypto podcasts just recently released by Excelcast. So thanks to you guys. All you guys are a big part of this. Thank you so much for helping us get there. And, the good thing is this is the place where we can start to spread the word. And I think that is the key thing. If you are in the XRP community, you understand how important it is to get it out there and get people out that maybe have never heard about XRP or crypto in general and get them acclimated to what's going on. So let's just jump into it today. I'm going to kick off with Mikkel just coming in, and we'll get into some of the news. Mikkel, how's it going, man?
Good, and congratulations on the podcast spot. That's awesome. And no, it's a great day. Always excited to come on the show and talk about what's going on in markets.
There was some good competition in that list. I didn't know that we had placed. I got an email from the research team from the podcast group that was doing it about a month ago, and they said, "Hey, listen, we want to get a little backgrounder on you. You're going to be ranking in a podcast list for crypto." So I said, "Yeah, sure. This is who we are, what we do." But Bankless was in there, CTO Larson. I think the top 4 were us, this podcast, Bankless, and CTO Larson, and then Virtual Bacon. I don't know if you have ever talked with Kevin's been on this show actually, but Virtual Bacon was on, and then Jay Klaver made it
Yeah,
into the top 15. So
it seems like there's been recently a big growth in the XRP presence when it comes to these podcasts. I
I
think
love
for a
it.
while it was kind of outside some of the mainstream stuff, but it seems like there's been a big switch and a lot more attention in the market on the XRP side of things.
Well, it's obvious. I think Wall Street is starting to look at Ripple and XRP in a completely different light. And of course, we'll lead off today and talk about Ripple's IPO no-go and what that means. Because Monica Long was on yesterday after I put out a tweet that simply asked, and I didn't mean to offend Ripple, but I simply asked, which would be the best IPO for 2026? And it was SpaceX. Ripple, of course, killed it. They were number 1 on the poll. And then the very next day, Ripple announces over on CNBC, "Hey, listen, we're not going IPO this year. We're going to step back." And I guess when you look at it, I understand it. The real question, because they're sitting on so much cash, so there's zero need for Wall Street money. This war chest they've got right now is pretty spectacular. What do you think would be one of the things that would hold them from going IPO this year?
Hold them from going IPO is an interesting question. I wonder, certain parts of me wonder if it has to do with general worries about, obviously, they're entering a big phase of their company where we're getting clarity in the United States. They're landing a
Yeah.
lot of partnerships. When you do go public, there's a lot more pandering to shareholders that you have
Mhm.
to take part in. You can even see what Elon Musk did when he took X private when he initially purchased it, because essentially he was saying, look, there's a lot that needs to be done here, and we don't necessarily want to be doing it in the public space. So I think Ripple could be looking at this as a huge year for crypto adoption. Maybe it doesn't make a ton of sense to be entering that year also dealing with the scrutiny of being a public company. I still am firmly convinced it's going to happen. It's more of a timing thing than anything else, in my opinion. And I think there's a lot of benefits to Ripple going public as well, but it seems like right now the best path for them is to hold that back and continue to operate as a private company as we get clarity rolling across the finish line here.
Well, Clarity, remember, it takes 8 months for an IPO to get, onto the market, and I think the key here is if Clarity doesn't go, and I had Warren Davidson on the main channel yesterday, and after that interview, which if you guys didn't see that interview, go back and listen to him talk about this because he has me a little bit on the fence right now of Clarity getting through. And the two sticking points, of course, are how they're trying to integrate in yields, the potential for self-custody, and then, of course, the CBDC issue, which is a bigger factor. But if Clarity does go through, you can just post 8 months forward, and I think that's when you see an announcement for Ripple maybe going into IPO. The other thing that I think with Brad and the team there is, they are gonna subject themselves to a complete new set of shareholder whims, quarterly earnings revenue pressure, all the stuff that you deal with on a Wall Street, you know, cladding of being public, and then the trap, Wall Street wants in cheap, man. They want in cheap, and Ripple sitting on so much cash, I wonder, do you think they're gonna do another acquisition this year, or do you think they'll just dive in and build?
I do think there's probably another acquisition kind of lined up here. I think what Ripple's really looking at is for most of the cryptocurrency market, and I think I talked about this last time on the show, there was never a bull market really. A lot of these things are
Right.
still at extremely depressed valuations, and I think Ripple's coming at this from a perspective where they have a lot of cash, and I think they see the future coming in terms of a lot of these companies probably having significantly higher valuations in the future, right? And take advantage of the opportunity, right? Buy the dip on a lot of these companies and load up on them prior to the market getting too hot.
Yeah.
Um, I think Ripple's going to take advantage of acquiring as much crypto infrastructure as possible, bringing it in house, and then wrapping it up into their core business model. And I love that strategy. The way Ripple's been able to strategically scoop up these infrastructure players, whether it's on
Huge.
custody or whether it's on the G Treasury side in terms of real world asset issuance. It's just a lot of good core infrastructure that I think ultimately comes over to the XRP Ledger in a really meaningful way. So I do think more acquisitions and, you know, in terms of the timing of the IPO, I do think it's something that happens eventually. But like we talked about, as Clarity continues to sort of be pushed off, when are we going to get it? Like, what's the next thing that needs to be solved here? I don't think it's still the perfect environment for an IPO to be rushed out there. I think Ripple's perspective is probably, hey, we're operating great as a private company. We have the cash. We don't need that cash. I think a IPO would give the insiders at Ripple kind of the nice to have in terms of liquidity on
Mhm.
the shares. I think it would bring a lot of attention to Ripple, the company, a lot of attention to XRP in the marketplace. But without the need for money, it's hard to say that any of this stuff is overly critical for them.
Well, and if you think about their, I don't know if I would call it their charter, but they're trying to be basically the central bank for the internet. And when you become that, I mean, you don't see the Federal Reserve IPO. So, I mean, if you think about, is there a possibility that they may not go IPO? I guess that's still a good possibility with the kind of things that are happening and the likelihood of market structure resetting the table around the world in how blockchain is gonna be used, Ripple a big part of that. That's only gonna increase revenue and opportunity for them. I
Yeah, I think there's plenty of good arguments that could say that they won't go public. In today's day and age, it seems like a lot of the biggest, most popular companies like a Ripple would end up going public. Yeah, it just seems to be a trend. Sort of companies of that stature do end up doing it. I even look at someone like Palantir, who you could argue in the way Ripple has the opportunity to run the monetary side of a lot of that critical infrastructure for the government. I think Palantir is doing a lot of the artificial intelligence and stuff
Right.
like that, and they're a public company. So I do think there's similarities sort of there, but Palantir sort of had the same thing. They didn't need money. They ended up doing a direct listing and wanted to go public just for brand recognition, bring more eyes to what they're doing, give insiders a little bit of room to move capital around. And by doing so, they actually really created this huge Palantir community underneath it, where I think there's a lot of excitement generally around what they were doing that wasn't there before. So even if there aren't these inherent needs for cash, what I've seen is becoming a public company can create a very sticky, dedicated shareholder base. But once again, because Ripple kind of already has that with XRP, I don't think you have the same need or the same
Yeah.
benefit to doing it like some of these other companies get.
Man, there's been so much stuff in the news. We covered a little bit of the Venezuela topic in a couple of podcasts, but I'm kind of curious, now that that's digested and we're starting to see maybe the administration's bigger plan here. A lot of people are asking what's next. I mean, are these guys creating that, the what are they calling it? The Donroe doctrine versus the Monroe doctrine, which essentially was really to try to control the Western Hemisphere. And if you look at the play right now on Venezuela, and all this is important to crypto or to the financial markets, and I'll get to why, but Greenland could be in play here. What do you think about that?
I personally think Greenland's absolutely in play. And, there's a lot of Trump is clearly looking at things a little bit differently. Trump is looking at, I think, the geopolitical long-term strategy of controlling these territories. So Greenland obviously offers a very important and critical, essentially, trade infrastructure for how the East can trade with the West. And I think generally there are long-term concerns about where Greenland falls in terms of like who that territory will ultimately and who those trade routes will be owned by. And I think Trump is taking what I really haven't seen in American politics ever in my lifetime is these long-term strategic territorial positioning plays. And I guess sort of the confusing thing is like they're not really outright coming out and saying that.
Yeah.
They're really like throwing out a whole bunch of different reasons for why they want to like acquire these territories. But if I've seen some brilliant people who are just take like a more neutral stance on it, break down how important those specific territories are to the United
Yep.
States for long-term trade. And it makes a ton of sense. So I think you could put Venezuela in that same category. You look at the amount of oil Venezuela controls. Obviously, they don't want that oil being distributed to China. It makes it harder for China ultimately to come into Taiwan. These are long-term strategic plays. How the market digests it is going to be extremely interesting because I think the biggest problem and the biggest negative you could come from this is where do you draw the line and where do you stop, right? I think a lot of people would raise concerns if other countries were doing something pretty similar to what we're doing. And I think that's where you get into a little bit of an issue. I think overall, these are smart, intelligent, long-term plays in terms of the strategic benefit of the United States. But where do you draw the line, right? Where do you say, okay, you can't just conquer anyone you want? I think that's where you start to raise some issues in how the market looks at this.
Well, and there's a lot of strategic issues that are at play here, and I think to your point is that Trump administration has been very methodical about going about this. And if you think about this is almost like the pincer strategy around where Venezuela and Greenland kind of play into this, because let's not forget, this is all about stabilization. If you look at and the timing is right too, because if you look at Venezuela, and a friend of mine who's in the oil business, he and I were talking about this week, and he said this is a very unique situation because Venezuela produces all this heavy crude. It's like a very rare kind of raw material, and one of the largest refinery center for heavy crude is in Houston, in the
Yep.
Galveston area. So the United States has the largest refinery for heavy crude in the world and in terms of capacity. And if you look about that, and then you kind of compare, you go back to rare earth minerals, this gets back to what we're talking about, which is real world assets and how this plays into it. But this puts a lot of squeeze on China. Obviously, China requires and relies on Venezuela a lot. They've been, of course, loaning Venezuela money forever, not expecting to get paid back because they wanted the oil. And now, Trump and the administration just took that off the table. That chess piece moved. So now China's lost the money on the loans and quite possibly lost the access to the oil. Whole situation could be playing into Greenland around where rare earth minerals, which is another scenario. And of course, you just saw up there what I was showing on a screen here with Marco Rubio, who's meeting with Denmark, who essentially is kind of the governing body over Greenland. And maybe this could get interesting, or at least in some sort of negotiation. Why is this important? RWAs and an asset class that might find its way onto raw materials as being traded just like any other commodity globally. That would be a big deal if we could unlock that. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a couple points here. One, the world we're heading into obviously is one of continued like division on a lot of these things. There's a lot of different people. Obviously, different countries are taking different sides of this. And I've made the argument forever: the more you have separation and deglobalization in a
Yep.
lot of these ways, the more you're going to have the need for neutral, counterparty-less ways for these countries to interact in a business perspective without having to necessarily trust one another. I think what you're going to continue to see is more global business done between countries and larger intertwined networks, but countries are going to develop more, become more self-sufficient, not have so much dependencies on the United States as they did
Yeah.
before in the past. And this increased need for self-sovereignty and this increased need to kind of control what you can control on your own internally, but obviously still needing to do business with these other countries. I think this paves the perfect path for mass adoption of decentralized financial systems where they can all interact with one another without having to say, you know what, we're putting our trust behind the United States to do us right here, right? They want to be able to do business with the United States. They might not want to have to trust the United States. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really big part of it. And then just the overall development, right, of this stuff becoming tokenized, coming on chain. That's all part of what I believe is going to be these newfound efforts to create a more trustless distributed financial system. It's all the building blocks of getting there. And, I don't think overnight there's going to be a huge issuance. I've made the point forever that the biggest issue right now in a lot of these tokenized projects is you're tokenizing all these assets, but the volume and liquidity isn't being brought on chain yet. I think the hidden roads and these prime brokers are really going to be that bridge, right? Those people that connect the buy side volume and the sell side volume to the tokenization market. And I think that's where we start to see some mass adoption because you can tokenize a trillion assets, put them on chain. If no one's buying or selling or using that as a marketplace, they sort of just sit there. Having the prime brokers involved to actually facilitate liquidity through these assets is what I'm really excited about because that's when this becomes a real marketplace and those tokenized assets really start to have some real world value associated with them.
Well, and it also solidifies XRP's status as a non-security commodity in essence. So this would create pretty much a green lane for all banks to hold it on their balance sheet. That's a big factor. And then look for the sleeper clause that if they do organize something here, you could look at something that could pertain to stablecoin reserves. So if the US takes control of an asset in Venezuela or in Greenland, let's assume, and they need a digitized dollar to monetize it, RLUSD. Boom.
Yeah.
There you go. Right there. So there's just so many things that apply to, and if you think about this, Trump knows how to use assets. Ripple may very well be like an NVIDIA. Think about that. The NVIDIA is a strategic corporate asset of the United States. I don't know if you saw the announcement at CES where Jensen Huang basically said, listen, we just made a magnitude leap into our tech. Did you see some of the chips that they were doing?
No, I haven't seen this
Oh
yet,
my
but
gosh.
it does get me excited because I've been an NVIDIA shareholder
Yeah,
forever.
you're gonna love it because it's basically a 10x leap on their chip manufacturing and the efficiency of them. So it essentially almost renders those H200s obsolete, which is why I think China has stepped away from the H200. So interesting. They are so far behind NVIDIA, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And, this is something that was talked about a long time ago by Kathy Wood, but it seems like you're really starting to see it, right? The advent of AI coming in and like completely flipping how we've done research and development, how we've innovated, how we've done these things. And it feels like we're compounding so quickly. I mean, the H200s feels like 4 months ago. We were talking about that these as being the best chips we've ever seen,
Yeah.
and leaps and bounds. And then these are coming out at such a fast rate. And there's been speculation. I always see this on social media, right? Like, oh, like Nvidia is just like inflating these orders. I saw Nvidia get hit with like this ban on China where they had to reroute this massive quantity of orders, and they did it overnight. Like the demand on these chips is absolutely insane.
Right.
It's one of the biggest arguments I've been making in terms of how the economy is so different than it used to be, right? There used to be like worries, I think, in an economic time right now where jobs might be a little iffy and all these different things. But we've created this second economy. I almost think of it as like these huge data centers, like this artificial intelligence sector, this cybersecurity sector. It's hard for me to imagine there's a slowdown anytime soon because of any boots on the ground sort of issues in the United States. And Nvidia is just one of those companies that is innovating so quickly and their stuff is in such high demand. It's hard to see that changing anytime relatively soon.
Well, and this is what, Wong was talking about, this Vera Rubin chip. I'm showing it here on screen now. It's basically gonna arrive later this year, but the key is that it resets the reasoning for AI, especially if you think about that's why I think he's partnering up with Tesla so much because obviously they're gonna control, I think, the use case of self-driving, which is another, full disclosure, another investment that I love. And I think this only starts to push more and more into back to my point earlier, is that Trump has these superpowers of companies like NVIDIA who are innovating at scale on the technology side. Then you have companies like Ripple who are innovating at scale on the financial side. And if you needed two measurements of advancements, control the money and control the tech. And I think that's where Ripple could really play into this. And this gets all back into the whole theory around putting a lot more pressure on these superpowers like China and Russia, which is going to be big, which I think silver and gold still continues to serve as kind of the shock for physical, but when it comes to digital and speed, it's going to be Ripple XRP.
Yeah. And I look at a lot of the valuations being assigned to these AI companies that I think are extremely exciting. A lot of it's on data processing at the end of the day. It's data
Right.
processing and reorganizing data and having compute be able to make inferences from data. Um, and I just think as great and as high value as that's going to be, I can't even imagine what will be assigned to digital rails built directly into the internet, right? When you start to actually assign this data compute to value, that's where we're headed, and cryptocurrencies are the rails to bring value into this internet age and combine value with these unique compute data processing advancements we've made with AI. I just think the value side of what's being brought to the internet through crypto, I think those valuations are going to be profound in comparison to what we see on the data side. I think value will ultimately be perceived as more important to the market and demand higher valuations. And I think that's what cryptocurrencies bring to the internet that the internet's been lacking for so long.
Well, and it makes the case of the AI blockchain play so powerful because it's almost a dual threat into how AI and technology is going to be used. Because really, if you look at AI and you look at tech in general, all of it has been centered around how do we build more commerce around this? And that's exactly where this is going. So I would agree with you. So your thought is that right now the AI trade is still early stage.
Yeah, I think it's extremely early. So I've made this point. There's absolutely companies that I think have valuations that are probably way overextended and probably some bubble-ish companies out there. I mean, um, it just and in terms of LLMs, I think LLMs are extremely interesting and there's a lot of cool stuff on the LLM side. But the raw advancement, like in terms of what we're seeing, I mean, whether this is to rapidly sequence and find inefficiencies or not inefficiencies, but inconsistencies in genomic sequences, I think is going to be a huge change in terms of how we solve and cure illness.
Yeah.
I think what AI is going to be able to do for coding, development, sequencing larger and larger code bases is going to be extremely profound. The amount of innovation AI brings to every single sector out there, I think is so insanely profound. And I just think we're barely scratching the surface of what this is going to end up being. So I think there's probably some over exuberance and some over excitement in the market in certain areas. I think long term, I mean, this is going to be
Right.
a 20 to 30-year change until we start to hit the maturity of what AI is bringing to the world.
I was looking at the impact of this whole Vera Rubin chip concept and what would it mean for, the crypto industry is really around Bitcoin mining. But this chip structure is it's so powerful and profitable for AI compute that it would basically force miners to evolve or die, because this is going to start squeezing miners who obviously have compute margins that right now are pretty fat in comparison. So I just wonder if they would start, maybe replacing all the SHA-256 ASICs out there with these Vera Rubin chips, which is going to create a whole new layer of speed and maybe less value. I don't know. This may hurt the miners in general.
I
What do you think?
I've made this point a lot, and it's a point that I think is a problem for Bitcoin. Maybe not
Yep.
a huge problem, but one of the things that I see as an issue for Bitcoin is the fact that mining is directly correlated to the security of the network.
Right.
With the XRP Ledger, you don't have that. There's no security component that's directly related to some incentive driven by the network. On the XRP Ledger, no incentive is the best incentive.
Mhm.
The problem I see with mining, right, is you have this schedule where miners are rewarded with Bitcoin as part of the protocol,
Mm.
and miners are there to run a profitable operation. Eventually, we get to a point, right, where computing, like you're talking about right now, changes the efficiency in which Bitcoin can be mined, or either we just get to the end of Bitcoin issuance by the Bitcoin chain. Eventually, right,
Right.
there's no more Bitcoin to be distributed. At that point, you have a an event that happens on the Bitcoin chain that's never occurred before that's directly tied to the security of the network. How is the Bitcoin protocol going to move forward in the event of, right, those mining rewards not being there, in the event that this compute changes the way that Bitcoin miners can profitably mine Bitcoin?
Mhm.
Having that tied to the security of the network, in my opinion, could be massively problematic. And not to say that it will, but it's hard for me to possibly look at that scenario and say there's not an unknown here. It seems like there is some relative unknown in how the protocol will handle these changes moving forward. And
Yeah.
to me, that is something that needs to be considered, right? Is there going to have to be a period where miners aren't making enough money because there's no more block reward? Does there have to be a new incentive brought to the Bitcoin network to encourage miners to stay? Is there going to be talk about raising fees on the network to do so? Is the Bitcoin network going to become too expensive where people don't want to use the chain? And without those
Mhm.
fees being used to supplement, how do you get that activity back to the chain? I'm not saying that these have to turn into bad things one way or the other, because the Bitcoin network has done an outstanding job of fixing these things and figuring them out through time. But the fact that there's a huge unknown there that directly relates to the security of the protocol, I think there's a lot of these things that have to be looked at very closely. It's one of the things that I don't think is given a lot of attention here. People always talk about how it's so good that we've almost issued all the Bitcoin. All the Bitcoin is essentially coming onto the market, and you're not going to see this sell pressure by miners. But why are miners creating sell pressure, right? It's because they are selling the Bitcoin to remain profitable and providing security to the network. If they're not being rewarded anymore for providing that security, are they
Yeah.
going to stay? And is the Bitcoin network going to continue to operate as it has before in the past? Those are questions I have.
Well, this gets into the whole point around hash rate consolidation, because you're talking about now, which what has been as diversified miners, as they switch to more of a focus, whether it is AI driven or not, the actual Bitcoin hash rate becomes more concentrated. And most likely it's going to end up in the hands of sovereign nations, whether it's El Salvador, the US, Russia, who knows, who are going to mine for strategic reserves and maybe end up operating the network, which eventually gets it into the ultimate, FU to Satoshi, which was a decentralized idea.
Well, it's been always one of my biggest things on the protocol side of these networks, and it's hard for me not to believe that in the case of Bitcoin, that money doesn't control the network. The more
Yep.
money you have in the real world, the more compute power you can buy, the more you take control of Bitcoin. And that, and to me, is a natural centralization factor, right? The person with the most money, with the best access to cheap electricity,
Yep.
ultimately takes control over that network over the long
Best
run. And
chips.
maybe you can make the argument that that's between 2 or 3 people. That's still value being the driver behind security, and the players with the most value and the best access to energy ultimately take long-term control of the network. That competition is a centralizing force. On the
Nickel, do
XRP
you
Ledger,
think?
you don't have the competition. It's a cooperative network. The
Yeah.
validators work together. There's no incentive to pin validators against each other. There's no incentive financially to take larger controls of the network. And it's a very different factor there. So for me, that core protocol design is something that has always been massively, in my opinion, beneficial to the XRP Ledger. And I think you have the same problem with Ethereum and proof of stake. When you have a network where the security is determined by how much real world value any given party has, to me, that seems like a issue moving forward, because there's always going to be incentive for parties to spend the most real dollars to take as much control of the network as possible and give them more power, which ultimately just leads to more centralization. I have that
Right.
problem with proof of stake. I have that problem with proof of work. It just seems like whoever has the most money gets the most control.
Do you believe that DePIN, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, do you think they're going to become maybe more important? Because DePIN was a highly discussed topic, and many of the companies and projects that were building on it. And you look at this now where a lot of these chips are basically going to be impossible for the average person or even a small company to buy them. So you're going to end up with hyperscalers out there. So whether it's Amazon, Google, Meta, whoever it might be, that's going to be leading the way. And if they get into a true DePIN environment, I just wonder if decentralized GPU networks would eventually become a thing. And do you know of any major projects within the XRP Ledger that would maybe go in that direction?
You know, I have seen some starting popping up that have started to do more community validator or community nodes sort of projects. I think it's a harder proposition on the other side of that, right? To create the counter argument on the XRP side, it's harder to promote that activity without there being a financial incentive on the other side, right? So for the same reason a financial incentive can be problematic in my eyes for concentration, I think there's also, it's harder to get grassroots movements on some of these things if there's no financial incentive to go ahead and do it. So I think it's got two sides of it. I do think ultimately that is where we go. I think there will be, and I would love to see this on the XRP Ledger for anyone who wants to go watch this and steal a great idea.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to, right? If just be able to contribute power, right? Or contribute my vote to some of these people, XRP, however it should be done, and have them go provide validation power on my behalf. Like, I'd be happy to go do that, and being able to harness the power of the community, maybe someone who doesn't necessarily want to buy this infrastructure and maintain this infrastructure on their own, but
Mhm.
for the community to be able to contribute these sort of things and increase the security and the decentralization of the network. I think that's a huge value proposition. I think it's something a lot of people would like to participate in.
And I think I guess in the way as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, Flare network essentially, I would think is kind of it's technically a separate L1 right now. It's almost a utility twin of XRP. Is that a DePIN angle? Is Flare? Maybe they could. Maybe it's just not about smart contracts. Maybe it's going to get more into data protocols. We've had this topic on before. If you think about maybe what they're doing, which is their whole series oracle, that could be interesting with what they're, especially if you pull in the AI connection, because that changes things pretty quickly. If they were renting these Vera Rubin chips and being able to run all these calculations, that inter- I'm gonna
And
have
and I think we're
to.
gonna continue to see an explosion of projects on the XRP ledger doing new, cool, interesting things. I mean,
Yeah.
in my time in the XRP community, when I first got started, there was very little outside development happening there. And now it seems like every single day there's a new, very cool, interesting project coming out. And Flair was one of the first people,
Yeah.
in my opinion, that really came forward with a very unique and cool value proposition. I had never seen anything like Flair before. There was a lot of different copycats, I felt like, coming out of the Ethereum ecosystem with like 10
Right.
million different versions of Uniswap, right? There's like Pancake Swap and like all these different swaps, and it was like the same thing over and over again. And then Flare was like just such a unique, cool idea that was so different with this XRP centric nexus. I think you're going to continue to see stuff like that because of people like the Easy A guys doing excellent
Yes.
work on the development side. There's so many cool projects coming out of this thing, and I think you're going to see an explosion of these sort of things happening over the next year or two.
Yeah.
People for the first time really feel comfortable, I think, building in the XRP Ledger ecosystem. And I think that's a trend that I expect to go all the way through 2026 and beyond.
There was a project that was trying to do something around decentralized like grid. They were building around decentralized grids, energy assets. I just want, and it was related to Ripple. Do you remember one like that? Yeah.
I do. There was projects here or
Oh,
there. I just
oh.
be just wouldn't want to say one and get it wrong on the on the promise.
It was something energy. It was like
Energy Web.
Energy Web. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, but I wasn't positive.
It was Energy Web. Yeah. They were, because if you think about what they're doing, that's basically in essence, connected, and they're going after energy asset. I think it was solar panels, batteries, things of that nature. Imagine, if you get a resource war scenario and the US needs a way to track energy provenance, that would be something like an energy web.
So this is what I think Ripple got really right with their acquisition of Hidden Road, in my opinion. Like the projects like the Energy Web, right? And like the carbon credit projects and all these different people, they all had these like really, really good ideas to go and tokenize all these different forms of value and
Yeah.
bring them on chain. But the problem was that I don't think people solved for or foresaw was like that doesn't necessarily, those assets aren't listed on Schwab or Fidelity. And like because of that, they're not listed by the DTCC. And
Mhm.
because of that, there's just no way for them to financially interact with these things. So by Ripple acquiring a prime broker and bringing liquidity to these tokenized assets, it creates the bridge from traditional finance to these decentralized assets, which I think has been the missing piece for such a long time. So many tokenization projects, so many things tokenized, so little actual volume and so little transactions via the tokenized assets. To me, the exciting thing is creating that bridge from legacy finance to this new digital financial system. And that's why I was so excited about Ripple focusing on this infrastructure to get these players in a place where they can actually start engaging in some of these new age markets, like you're showing right here with Energy Web
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
tokenized
I
energy
looked
credit.
at this. I remembered the project, and we were doing some research on it probably a year or two ago, and ran into it. It was based on how it was connected to XRP and the XRP ledger. And now I look at this and I think, man, this is a very interesting tie-in, especially if you look at deep in that might truly play a role in this, especially around all of this advancement into AI. I know we're getting deep in the weeds. The key here is that Ripple's in the right place at the right time, it seems like. When you look at all the things that are happening right now, what would be the one? Well, give me a couple or just one. For 2026, what would be surprise you on the bingo card for Ripple? Anything specific?
Surprise me, surprise me, or something that I think would be, I think the biggest thing that would really be something that I would like to see, um, is I wanna see a United States tier 1 financial institution, using XRP as liquidity through one of Ripple's products. I think
Okay,
for
there you go.
me, that would be like game, set, match. Like, the
Yeah.
second that happens, in my opinion, you have, like, this huge, huge spider web effect where suddenly there's going to be mass competition for other financial institutions to get plugged into the system. And I think it will instantaneously position XRP as this regulated, decentralized piece of liquidity that's now accessible to the United States financial market. And I just think so many people, after seeing that, would start flipping their switch and saying, we need access to this. Like, this is the thing that I have personally been waiting for in terms of something that would make me incredibly excited about what's coming. It seems like for the longest time, it was huge speculation that they would even consider something like this. And it was like, oh, the YouTubers are talking about it. Now you have a lot of these financial institutions stepping into crypto and talking about it and saying, hey, this is something we want to do. And these partnerships emerging with Ripple, but we're not yet to hear anything that's like, we're using XRP for this. I want like that. Hey, we're using XRP for this. We're this massive financial institution. This is how we incorporated XRP into our payment stack. Like, that to me is super exciting.
Yeah. Well, I think when you look at nation building as a service, I tweeted this out there not too long ago.
Oh, I love that.
Did you hear that? Did you see that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that post?
Yeah.
So it showed Elon and Trump meeting, and I was like, yeah, this is him talking about nation building as a service. What can I do? You know, because he's already dropping Starlink in there. But here, this would be a kind of an outlier for me. Is I think about what's going on globally, and you look at a strategic partnership with a U.S. allied sovereign fund. So whether you link that to Venezuela or other emerging markets to tokenize their commodities, their physical commodities, and you do it on the XRP ledger.
Yeah.
That would be, man, that would be game, set, match. Because then you're talking about a blueprint for any emerging country that has resources to go to market.
That's
Huge.
That's, and that's one of the things that I think is so missed out on the tokenization side. Being able to instantaneously have a marketplace to bring any resource and instantly have accessibility to the entire world.
Yep.
The problem is consistently is if I do that, who's going to be on the other side? That's why I keep on harping on this prime broker side. You need someone to facilitate the buys and sells on this network and create a marketplace that is going to bring buyers and sellers together over this decentralized network. And that's why I get so excited about what I see as Ripple's newfound avenue into the settlement broker dealer space in terms of not just payments, but facilitating liquidity in a blockchain world for any type of transaction, right?
No
To
doubt.
me, that's what brings liquidity to these markets. That way, country A can go put this on the XRP ledger, and then there can be real large value interactions between countries. And then that's where we kind of come full circle to what we talked about earlier in the show. There's no trust involved, right? We have to trust the United States in order for us to engage in this financial transaction. It's two countries, two entities engaging with one another with just decentralized code in the middle, acting as that marketplace. So the United States can't say, oh, actually, we decided to seize these assets from you and we're taking the money from this transaction. Two countries doing business with one another, no trust needed. All they have to do is both trust the code in between them. That's, in my opinion, the next generation financial system.
Well, it is. I mean, it's also the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize has been the plan all along, and most people are just waking up to it and realizing that that's been the plan all along. And all of a sudden it's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, you go back
Good
to
idea.
the clips of Gary Gensler in 16, talking about currency wars, talking
Yep.
about like
Yep.
XRP as a bridge currency. And you see things like that, and sometimes you just sit back and you gotta think there's something larger being talked about behind the scenes. When I saw the documents of Ripple meeting with the Federal Reserve in 2013, and like Ripple as a company was founded in 2012. I don't know too many companies that founded a year later meeting with the Federal Reserve. Like, I don't know how that happens. To me, that's a pretty unique coincidence right there.
All right, guys, you know what to do. Go out there and visit Mikkel over on YouTube. You can catch him right there. I like the blue sky image right there. Is that kind of nuanced for, hey, there's a lot of blue sky yet to uncover?
I love it. And Paul, I promised, like, I was going to set my YouTube thing, and like there was some like Microsoft screensaver that fit well there, and I just threw it on there.
I always think there's something deeper in these things, Mikkel, when we get into these conversations. But the cool thing is that they're usually unscripted, for all of you guys out there. We usually have a couple of talking points, but Mikkel and I go at it, like this all the time. So, just hashing up ideas, looking at where the markets are.
I love it,
Great.
Paul. It's one of my it's one of the reasons I love coming on this show. We'll give each other a quick, hey, let's talk about this, and where the show ends up is where the show ends up. But just love being able to talk with highly educated people in the markets, and I think the viewers really benefit from hearing the back and forth and hearing how these things come to be and how we think about these things at a high level. It's one of my favorite conversations to have.
No doubt. All right, guys, you know what to do. Make sure and like and subscribe here on the XRP pod. We are going to continue to grow. We're working to try to hit the 500,000 mark this year. It's going to be great. So give us some love out there. And Mikkel, I'll catch you later. Okay.
Absolutely. Always a blast. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time right here on the XRP pod. Take care.